What Metternich meant by the chaos that he tried to avert from Europe as long as possible by resigned and uncreative activity, by concentrating on preserving the existing state of things, was not so much the decay of the system of states, with its balance of power, as the parallel decay of the dignity of the state, right? Staatsheit. Even in the individual countries, a conception which is now almost lost to us, what we recognize as order today and expressed in liberal constitutions is nothing but anarchy become a habit. We call it democracy, parliamentarianism, national self-government, but in fact it is the mere non-existence of a conscious, responsible authority, a government that is, a true state. Human history in the period of the high cultures is the history of political forces. The form of this history is war. But peace is also a part of it, for it is the continuation of war with different means, the attempt of the vanquished to shake off the consequences of the war in the shape of the treaties, the attempt of the victor to maintain them. A state represents the being in condition of a national unit trained and set up by it for real and potential wars. When the form, the Gestalt, when the form is very high, it has in itself the value of a victorious war, which is won without weapons and solely by the weight of the force ready to come into play. If form is poor, it approximates to continuous defeat in the state's relation to other powers. States are purely political units of radiated power. They are not units bound up with race, language, or religion, careful, but stand above these. Whenever they coincide or mingle with such elements, their strength usually declines and never increases in consequence of the inward contradiction. Internal politics exist only to secure the strength and unity of external politics. And when they pursue different aims of their own, decay sets in and the state gets out of form. For a power to be in form as a state among states, it must have strength and unity in its leadership, its government, and its authority, without which the state has no real existence. State and government constitute the same form, whether considered in existence or as activity. The power of the 18th century were in form, right? A form strictly defined by the dynastic tradition of court and society, and to a great extent identical with it. The ceremonial, the tact of good society, the polite manners observed in bargaining and negotiating were but a visible expression of it. England, too, was in form. Her island situation was a substitute for certain important features of a state. And parliamentary government was an eminently aristocratic and effective form, yes, established by ancient usage of doing business. France became involved in a revolution not because the people opposed absolutism, right, which no longer existed, nor because of the poverty and indebtedness of the country, for these were far greater elsewhere, but because authority was in process of dissolution. Right? Carlyle said they had it coming. All revolutions start from the decline of state supremacy. Right? A street insurrection can never have this effect. It is a mere consequence. Right? You don't have a revolution when the boot is on your neck. That revolution comes when the boot is off and the power is weak. Right? A modern republic is nothing but the ruin of a monarchy that has given itself up. Well, with the 19th century, the powers passed from the form of dynastic states into that of national states. But what exactly does this mean? Nations, that is, civilized peoples, had of course been there long before. Moreover, on the whole, they coincided with the spheres of authority of the great dynasties. These nations were ideas, right? In the sense in which Goethe speaks of the idea of its existence, the inward form of a significant life which, unaware and unobserved, inspires every deed and every word. But La Nation, in the sense of 1789, was a rationalistic and romantic ideal, a wish picture of expressly political, not to say social tendency. In this shallow age, no one is able to distinguish the two. An ideal is the product of a reflection, a conception or proposition which has to be formulated before one can have it. Accordingly, it shortly becomes a catchword which one uses without spending any more thought on it. Ideas, on the other hand, are wordless. Vessels are seldom, if ever, aware of them, and for others, they can hardly be conveyed in words. They must be felt and visualized happenings, described in actual realizations. The definition they defy. Neither wishes nor aims concern them. They are the obscure urge which attains form in human life and soars fatefully and directionally over the individual existence. Thus, the idea of Romanness, the idea of the Crusades, the Faustian idea of striving after the infinite. Now, it's interesting. The implications of that are very, very, I would argue, bordering on Lovecraftian. But anyway, let me get this back to here. Real nations are ideas even today. But what nationalism signifies since 1789 is shown by the very fact that it confuses its mother tongue with the written language of the city, where everyone learns to read and write, with the language, therefore, of newspapers and pamphlets that preach to all the rights of the nation and its pressing need of being delivered from this, that, or the other. Real nations are, like every living organism, of high internal structural complication and constitute a kind of order by their mere existence. But political rationalism understands by a nation freedom from and struggle against any sort of order. Nation is for rationalism analogous to mass, a formless, structuralist thing, rulerless and aimless. This it calls the sovereignty of the people. It forgets significantly the matured thought and feeling of the peasantry. It scorns the manner and custom of true folk life, among which, and in a high degree, is respect for authority. It knows not respect, but only principles derived from theories, of which the chief is the plebeian one of equality, namely substitution of quantity for the detested quality, and of number for the coveted talent. Modern nationalism replaces the people by the masses. It is revolutionary and urban through and through. Most sinister of all is the ideal of a nation governed by itself. A nation cannot, of course, govern itself any more than an army can lead itself. It has to be governed. And as long as it possesses healthy instincts, it likes to be governed. But something quite different is meant. The notion of popular representation is from the first the leading principle of every such movement. Persons who designate themselves representatives of the people come along and recommend themselves as such. They have no intention whatever of serving the people. They intend to make the people serve them in their more or less sordid aims, of which the gratification of vanity is the least harmful. They oppose the forces of tradition in order to set up themselves in its place. They oppose the state order because it hampers their own form of activity. They oppose every kind of authority because they wish to be responsible to no one and themselves evade all responsibility. No constitution contains a court of appeal before which parties might have to justify themselves. They oppose above all the cultured form of the state, which has slowly grown up and matured because they do not possess it within themselves as the good society of the 18th century possessed it, and therefore feel it as a form of compulsion, which is not for culture people. Thus we get the democracy of the century. Not form, but formlessness. In every sense as a principle, parliamentarism, constitutional anarchy, the republic, the negation of every kind of authority. And so European states got out of form in proposition as they were more progressively governed. This was the chaos which moved Metternich to oppose democracy, irrespective of its tendency, in the romantic type of the wars of liberation, as well as the rationalistic type of the Bastille stormers, both of which were combined in 1848. Everyone forgets the revolutions of 1848. And to be equally conservative in his attitude towards all reforms. Since then, parties have been formed in all countries, that is, side by side with individual idealists. There arose groups of business politicians of doubtful origin. What are you trying to say? And more than doubtful ethics, journalists, advocates, financiers, literary hacks, party agents. They govern by representing their own interests. Did he write this last week? Monarchs and ministers have invariably been responsible to someone, if only to public opinion. These groups alone were accountable to nobody. The press, originally the organ of public opinion, has long since begun to serve the man who subsidized it. Elections, once the expression of that opinion, brought in as a victorious the party with the biggest money behind it. If nevertheless there still existed a kind of state order or conscientious ruling of authority, it resided in remnants of the 18th century form, which persisted in the form of monarchy, however constitutional, of the officer corps of diplomatic tradition, and as regards England, in age-old parliamentary usage, particularly in the upper house, and in the two-party system. To these remnants was due everything that the state had succeeded in bringing about in spite of parliaments. Had Bismarck not been able to rely upon his king, he would have probably have succumbed to the democracy. Political dilettantism, whose arena was parliament, regarded these forces of tradition with suspicion and hatred. It opposed them on principle and without restraint or thought for the external consequences. And thus everywhere, home politics became a sphere which made demands on experienced statesmen that were quite out of relation to its importance, wasting their time and strength and causing them to forget and to will to forget the original meaning of statesmanship, which is the direction of external policy. This condition of things is the anarchic intermezzo, known today as democracy, which leads from the destruction of the monarchical state supremacy by way of political plebeian rationalism to the Caesarism of the future. There are already signs in the dictatorial tendencies of our time of this Caesarism, which is destined to assume the unlimited mastery over the ruins of historical tradition. What a writer, eh? I'm sure it's better than the original German, but